This video is prepared for public education by a Center for Forest and Biodiversity Management Studies, a unit of Vrikshamitra Gadchiroli-Chandrapur. In this video, world-famous scientist and ecologist Dr. Madhav Gadgil has expressed his views on adaptive management of forest resources in India. Let us listen what he says.
The early British chroniclers described India as an ocean of trees soon after East India Company conquered it. East India Company was of course here to commercially exploit the nation's resources, and East India Company had behind it the prestige of science and modern technology, because it was this science-based technologies which had allowed them to navigate the ocean so effectively, to use guns and other modern equipment to conquer India in the wars that they waged. So the East India Company also tried to utilize the prestige of science to justify the commercial exploitation of India's resources. So they started talking of Indians having been guilty of unscientific management of forests before the British set foot in India, and that the scientific management of forests was now going to set everything right. Well, it turns out that while of course science had supported ships and guns, science had very little understanding of complex systems such as the forests. And indeed, even today, ecologists admit fully that their understanding, scientific understanding of such complex systems is very limited, and therefore one must talk of the scientific management of natural resources in a spirit of humility, in fact. But the so-called scientific forest management launched in India, and of course what it really was dressed up as the commercial exploitation of forests dressed up as scientific management, led to firstly conversion of the forested tracts of India into cauldrons of conflict. It led to replacement of the natural diversity by stands of a few species such as teak and sal, and it led to elaboration of a so-called scientific superstructure which actually violates the spirit of science. Today we have before us an opportunity to correct all these serious deficiencies in the forest management of India, and perhaps bring it back, convert the country back into the ocean of trees that it once was. Let me give a few examples of what the so-called scientific management of forests has done. I became interested in the scientific management of forests when in 1974 the then finance minister of the Karnataka was gherraud by basket weavers of Karnataka, claiming that their livelihoods were being destroyed by overexploitation of bamboo resources by the paper mills. The authorities, on the contrary, claimed that no, it was the rural population that was destroying the bamboo resources, that the mill and supervised by the forest department was using these resources very carefully sustainable. 5 years of serious field work showed that those claims were simply false, that the projection of how much bamboo stock there was, which is a major basis of the scientific management, was exaggerated not by a small amount, by a factor of 10. When the paper mills were being set up, it was claimed that there were 10 times as much bamboo resources as there were. Secondly, the prescriptions for harvest of bamboo, which were again claimed to be scientific, were in fact completely based on incomplete understanding and assertions that what the authorities knew was right. Let me take a specific example. The paper mills were spending a lot of money doing so-called clump cleaning operations. That is to say, most species of bamboos have a natural thorny cover at the base of the clumps, and that thorny cover has the ecological function of protecting the new shoots from grazing by wild pigs and monkeys and by, of course, domestic cattle and so on. This was being removed at an expense by the mill in the belief that that led to non-congestion of the clumps and a far better growth of the new bamboo shoots. Our careful field experiment showed that that was not so at all, that indeed the exposure of the shoots to grazing was leading to serious mortality of the new shoots. In many cases, as much as 93% of the new shoots were grazed upon, destroyed by, as I said, wild pigs, by monkeys, by cattle and so on, porcupines, and the bamboo clumps started actually declining. This was something Forest Department or paper mills had not bothered to observe, not kept any records, but they kept on asserting that their clump cleaning was in fact a practice favorable to bamboos. I came in close contact with people at the ground level during the course of these 5 years of field studies, and the villagers told, of course, this clump cleaning was a very foolish exercise, that when they harvested bamboos, they made sure that the thorny covering remained intact up to a height of about 1.5 feet at least, that they harvested the bamboos only above that level, and that then the protection continued and the new shoots did not fall prey to grazing the way the cleaned up clumps exposed the shoots to. So there was, I discovered, a great deal of experiential knowledge, practical technology with the people, which was very relevant to proper utilization management of these bamboo resources. This was simply not available with the Forest Department, with the mills. They had not bothered to invest into proper field research, but as I said, their so-called scientific working plans were simply based on assertion that they were the scientific authorities and what they wrote were scientific working plans. The spirit of science, in fact, says that you must not accept any authority, certainly not of forest departments or any other such agencies. Indeed, modern physics is a shining example of rejecting the authority even of so great a scientist as Newton. Science says that there is no ultimate truth, that we have to continually experiment, we have to continually observe and make adjustment to our understanding as our observations reveal new and new phenomena, such as in the case of the acceptance of relativity, the phenomenon of bending of light rays near certain stars showed that Newton's propositions were incomplete, that new propositions had to be brought in. Forest working plans, therefore, must also be, if they are to be true to the spirit of science, they must also be taken as working hypotheses, that what is proposed as certain prescriptions are to be taken as experimental measures. Whether they actually work or not should be continually tested. If they do not work, then why they do not work should be carefully assessed and this working scheme appropriately changed. This simply does not happen. The whole approach is rigid. Even so great a scientist as Salim Ali in a way fell prey to this approach, as the history of the Bharatpur wetland shows. Salim Ali had of course worked for many years at Bharatpur, and he was very aware that it was a treasure trove of water birds for India, and he wanted to protect it. He, however, had the wrong impression that the grazing by domestic buffaloes of this wetland was actually spoiling the habitat for the water birds. He had not undertaken any careful experimental observations to check this, but there was this prejudice which unfortunately is widely prevalent in the Indian educated classes, that it is the rural demands on natural resources that are harming those resources, and regretfully Dr. Salim Ali also shared those prejudices. And I spent a lot of time with him in Bharatpur, and every evening we used to go for long walks, and we used to see these large numbers of buffalo returning from the wetland to the villages. And he used to tell me, Madhav, once these wretched buffaloes are banned, Bharatpur will be safe. Well, at his insistence, Bharatpur became a national park, and in 1983 the grazing was banned. And what was the result? Well, it turned out that actually the buffalo grazing was keeping the wetland free of being choked by water loving grass, paspalum. And once the grazing was banned, the wetlands began to be choked and became a much worse habitat for the water birds. Now, in the modern scientific spirit, what Dr. Salim Ali should have proposed and what the Forest Department should have done is to consider grazing of buffaloes being detrimental to the wetlands and water birds as a hypothesis. They should have excluded grazing in a small portion of the wetlands, observed the effects. If the effects had turned out to be beneficial for the wetland and water birds, the grazing should have been extended to other areas, otherwise it should have been withdrawn. But what was done was that the rigid prescription of banning everywhere was imposed, and actually it had a negative consequence. Bharatpur became a much worse habitat. Now, it is this we must reverse, and of course, as the Forest Department working plans are not genuinely grounded in science, their predictions do not work. So, there has been a history of consistent depletion of forest resources as the working plans claims that they are being sustainably used have proved to be untrue. As I said, but this has never been examined and never been corrected. Let me take another example which I encountered in my study of forest resources of Karnataka. The plywood industry in Karnataka was being handed over softwood trees, just like bamboo was also handed over to paper mill at incredibly subsidized prices. At that time in 70s, paper mill was paying 1.5 rupee per ton for bamboo, and in 70s basket weavers of Karnataka were buying bamboo on market at 1500 rupees. Similarly, the plywood industry was given the well-known Appimedi variety of mangoes in the forests of Karnataka at some 40 rupees per tree, when actually the Appimedi mango harvests, these are very good pickling mangoes, every year people were getting hundreds of rupees by collecting those mangoes, and one time 40 rupees is all the plywood industry paid to get the trees. The plywood industry's use of these softwood resources one by one exhausted the various very useful softwood trees useful for plywood. So now they wanted to shift to other resources, and of course to tap the few resources of softwood trees which were left. And where were those resources still available? They were in the sacred groves of Karnataka, groves which people had maintained on basis of certain cultural religious feelings for thousands of years. And interestingly, the first Inspector General of Forest of India, Dietrich Brandis, had praised these sacred groves, saying that they were a great system of conservation of nature, and that he regretted the fact that under East India Company's regimes, these sacred groves had been rapidly disappearing from all over the country. Well, what Brandish wrote in 1883, the Karnataka Forest Department completed in 1973, they declared that they were going to now take over all sacred groves of Karnataka for exploitation, because it was in the sacred groves, some of them as large as 400 hectares, which had the remaining softwood trees which the plywood industry was eyeing. And they replaced those sacred groves by eucalyptus plantations, again without any proper scientific experiments, because in the high rainfalls areas of Karnataka, Western Ghats, the eucalyptus plantations fell prey to a fungal disease, so called pink disease, and when the sacred groves were cut and eucalyptus plantations were made, the Forest Department had made claims that the productivity now of the new eucalyptus plantations would be at least 15 tons per hectare per year, up to 30 tons. With the disease, and this was not based on any proper scientific studies, with the disease, the productivity came down to 1.5 to 3 rupees as 3 tons per hectare per year. So the claims that the eucalyptus plantations were going to enhance the productivity simply did not materialize. So you can see, unfortunately, this regime has converted the forest tracts of India into arenas of conflict, into arenas of devastation of natural diversity, and into arenas of perversion of the spirit of science. I believe that we should objectively examine this, accept this, and now take this wonderful opportunity of the availability of community forest resources for proper scientific management in the hands of people to correct these distortions and restore the health of these forested tracts. I think it is entirely possible, and I am very happy to see that some examples of this happening are already emerging. In Gadchiroli district and Chandrapur districts of eastern Maharashtra, where I have myself been observing the implementation of the management of community forest resources by the communities over last few years, let me quote a few examples. Now, the forest department's commercial objectives were to promote the growth of just a few species like teak. For the people, the variety of plant species are important, and there are many products from the plants which people value. So they are looking at a whole range of possibilities. Now, one of the things Forest Department themselves did not harvest, but the tendu leaves are an important commercial product, and all over the forest departments used to auction tendu leaf harvest to contractors, and the contractors used to employ local people as wage laborers. They made some earnings, but minimal earnings as just manual laborers. There is one panchayat, Pasgaon, in Chandrapur district, which has been now assigned the community forest resource right over about 1,000 hectares. And Pasgaon people did a very interesting exercise. They asked every family to come up with a set of at least 5 regulations for forest management as to what they think is a good thing to do. Some 500 such suggestions were compiled, pruned down by eliminating the duplicates to some 140. 2 full days the Grama Sabha debated them, and then they began to be implemented. Interestingly, Pasgaon people also used to make a certain amount of income as tendu leaf harvesters. Now they decided that now that the entire forest resources was at their disposal to manage as they thought was proper, the tendu leaf harvests they raised question marks about that excessive lopping in harvesting tendu leaves, in setting of fires to make it easy to harvest leaves, was harming the overall forest substantially. Besides, they realized that with that kind of management, tendu fruit yield was down. And tendu fruit is very good edible fruit and has very good market, and they decided to actually forego the income from tendu leaf harvest for a few years to revive the forest and bring back good fruit yields. And this is beginning to happen. 500 regulations which the community drafted were others which were not merely relating to forest management but overall civic life. One of these was that people should stop smoking bidis in the village. It's a bad health destroying habit. And then the tendu leaves, they are used to bake bidis. So should they be gathering tendu leaves and contributing to this national level bidi industry? They decided that would not be such a good idea. Apart from that, of course, what was very important for them from a forest management perspective was that while collecting the tendu leaves for the bidi trade, they actually excessively lopped the trees, they set fires to the ground, and that led to a overall degradation of the forest. It also meant that the very desirable other product of tendu tree, the edible fruit, its yields declined. So overall it would be good to forego the income from the tendu leaf collection, wait maybe for a few years for the fruit yields to go up. Very interestingly, this emphasizes the fact that the fear expressed that for immediate economic gain, the people who are now managing the community forests will destroy it, was completely misplaced, because here the people actually accepted temporary economic sacrifice to improve the natural ecosystem and to, in the long run, improve their economic life also by beginning to get good price, good market for the enhanced fruit yield. Secondly, there was a lot of propaganda before the Forest Right Act came to be implemented that would lead to devastation of natural diversity, that it is the official management which is protecting diversity and the communities which destroy it. Well, I told you how official management was protecting diversity by felling all the sacred groves of Karnataka and continued to do so all these years. Ongoing discourse relating to sacred groves in India, all that people are talking about is that cultural beliefs, religious beliefs are weakening and sacred groves are being destroyed all over the country. The people who are not in touch with ground realities do not realize that in fact here with the community forest resources you have a reversal of this trend, that once given proper authority over the forest, people are on their own beginning to protect them. In the community forest resources areas of Gadchiroli-Chandrapur, the villagers on their own are thinking of setting aside 10-12% of the area as sacred forests. In Pasgaon, they have set aside initially 3%, which was important for them as the source of their streams which fed the forest and the agriculture of the villages. In another village, Mendhalekha, for instance, they have decided to set aside as much as 12% of the area in 7 different patches. Now, choice of these 7 different patches shows an interesting example of use of scientific information along with people's understanding and knowledge. So, the initial survey of the forest resources had allowed mapping of the ecological habitats, had allowed estimation of diversity levels in different parts of the forest, and then the people in the Gram Sabha, in their entire village assembly, had a detailed debate as to which patches are to be protected. And they used this scientific information in trying to select patches which represented different kinds of ecological habitats, which represented different compositions of the species, and then of course they combined this with their own understanding of where it would be difficult to protect, where it would be relatively easier to protect. So, bringing these 2 types of understanding together, they made a very intelligent, very good choice of the sites for these pengedas or sacred grounds. Of course, scientific inputs are very important, because despite what I have said about the pretentious scientific management, which did not have the spirit of science at its base, science has a great deal to offer, and we must combine the folk wisdom, experiential knowledge with scientific understanding to do the jobs properly. In another village, Mendhalekha, where I have been involved, let me take a specific example. Bamboo is an important resource, and bamboo now is with the people, and to be able to plan its utilization properly, they have to assess how much bamboo there is, what is the length of these bamboo columns, and make proper plans for its harvest. They also have started doing other things, which are soil and water conservation measures in all the areas, appropriately located soil water conservation measures near the bamboo clumps, so that the bamboo growth is in fact beginning to be improved. To make those assessments, you need to carefully, quantitatively sample the forest resource and decide on a sample which will represent the overall population, and actually then use that sample studied in the field to project the overall bamboo resources. Now, the forest department's earlier sampling and projections were actually based on methods which were available in 1900s to the ecologists. They have not changed over 115 years. Ecology has progressed. Lot of understanding of sampling methodology, especially in the field ecological context, has evolved, and those methods are now available and should be used. Amongst the important advances is that the sampling must be based on a landscape perspective, that one must look at what are in the land distribution of various ecological habitats. One must carefully organize sampling in relation to the ecological habitats. Mendhalekha people, with whom I have the privilege of collaborating, are implementing this. They are using this landscape approach for sampling. Secondly, the statistical methods for projection of sampling. Those methods were again evolved as the current forest assessment methods that Forest Department is using in early 20th century, more than 100 years ago, when no computers were available, and therefore those methods were not at a level of efficiency which is now possible with the tremendous advance in computers. So now with the Mendalekha people, we are taking advantage of these new facilities of the power of computers, and the statistical methods are in fact greatly improved upon through using what are called Monte Carlo simulations. So there are all these factors which are coming in, and the working schemes which are being prepared now, I believe, in true spirit of science, which very interestingly the youth of Mendalekha are rapidly picking up. Then they are not making schemes for 40 years like many of the, or 20 years like many of the forest working plans, because world is rapidly changing, and in this world one must continually adopt, must observe and adopt, as I emphasized earlier with the example of, say, the glazing in Bharatpur. So the schemes are being prepared for next 5 years or so, and there will be on the spot continual observation of what are the actual results of the management, and based on those results the working scheme will be properly modified. Let me take two examples. Firstly, there will be because of the water and soil conservation measures implemented, an improvement in the bamboo stocks. Now, as this improvement actually materializes, then the prescriptions of what and how much to harvest should have to be appropriately adjusted, and this is what is being visualized. So now the working schemes can be cast in the proper spirit of science, of being adaptable, of being nimble, not being rigid, of continually adjusting. There are other interesting possibilities. When I studied the bamboo resources in Karnataka, I learnt that a lot of the officials and both with the departments, mills, they were making a good deal of money on the side. How? Because the hollow culms of bamboos, many of them have silica crystals, and those silica crystals have demand in the Ayurvedic pharmaceutical industry, and these were never thought of by the paper industry, who only wanted to pulp the bamboo. Now these, as I said, these clever people were harvesting those silica crystals and making money. When now bamboo is with the people in, say, Gadchiroli-Chandrapur, they can begin to think of, and they are beginning to think of these whole lot of other products, including these silica crystals. And if those are important, then one will have to see how you can adjust your harvesting to make sure that this product is also brought into income stream. With all this, I see, as I said, a tremendous potential for, of course, the people acting cooperatively with the community forests, but for the scientific community to get involved in an experiment of developing a confluence, coming together of scientific knowledge and experiential knowledge, of applying our scientific understanding not merely to enhancing exploitation, but actually ensuring conservation, better use and prosperity to people who really ought to be beneficiaries of economic development. So I believe that this is an important opportunity, that both, of course, the people involved who are now the managers of the resources, but also the other community, especially the intellectuals of India, should contribute to the success of this, I think, remarkably progressive experiment.